My name is Claire Morgan, and for 11 years I believed I knew the man I married. His name was Daniel. We met when we were both struggling. I was 28, working 2 jobs and trying to pay off my mother's medical bills. Daniel was charming, ambitious, and the kind of man who could make a bad day feel temporary. When he proposed, he didn't have a 6-figure salary. Neither did I. We had a tiny apartment, an old car, and a kitchen so small that 2 people couldn't stand in it without bumping into each other. But I was happy. Or at least I thought I was. For 11 years, I stood beside Daniel through everything. When his business failed, I stayed. When he lost his job, I covered the rent. When his father died, I held him while he cried. When he finally started making serious money, I celebrated like his success was my own. I never asked for expensive gifts. I never demanded luxury vacations. All I wanted was to know that the man beside me loved me for who I was. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when Daniel walked into the room. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even nervous. He simply placed a white envelope in front of me. "What's this?" I asked. He sat across from me. "Claire, I think we need to talk." I opened the envelope. The first line made my hands go cold. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." I stared at it, then I looked at him. "You're divorcing me?" Daniel took a slow breath. "I think it's better for both of us." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because my brain couldn't understand what I was reading. "Daniel, we were talking about going to Napa next month." "I know. We were planning your birthday." "I know. You kissed me goodbye this morning." He looked down. "I know." "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately, and that silence told me more than any explanation could have. For 11 years, I had believed our marriage was built on love, but suddenly I wondered if it had been built on something else. Convenience, security, and maybe money. Because Daniel had no idea that my life was about to change. He had no idea that a letter was sitting in my office drawer. A letter from an attorney. A letter concerning my late grandfather's estate. An inheritance that had been delayed for almost 3 years. An inheritance worth approximately $35 million. And Daniel had filed for divorce just weeks before the money was officially scheduled to transfer. But here's the part he didn't know. I had already learned something about my grandfather's estate that would completely change the situation. And before I tell you what happened next, if you enjoy emotional family stories about betrayal, unexpected consequences, and people discovering their true worth, please subscribe to the channel. Because this story wasn't really about $35 million. It was about what happened when the person you trusted most finally showed you who they really were. And I was about to find out exactly who Daniel was. Daniel and I didn't start with money. That's what made everything so painful. When we met, I was working mornings at a small bakery and evenings at a medical billing office. Daniel was trying to build a software company with 2 friends. He had big dreams, sometimes too big, but I loved that about him. He would sit across from me at cheap restaurants and talk about the future. "One day," he used to say, "I'm going to build something that changes our lives." And I'd smile. "I don't need a mansion." He'd laugh. "I know. I don't need a Ferrari. I know. I just want a little house with a backyard." He would reach across the table and hold my hand. "Then that's what I'll give you." Those memories were still alive inside me when he filed for divorce. That's why I couldn't understand it. For several weeks, Daniel became increasingly distant. He started working late. He began guarding his phone. He changed his passwords. He suddenly cared about designer clothes. Then one evening he came home and said something I'll never forget. "Claire, you've changed." I looked at him. "How? You've become comfortable." I almost smiled. "Isn't that what marriage is supposed to feel like?" He shook his head. "No, I mean you've stopped trying." That sentence stayed with me because I had spent 11 years trying to support him, trying to keep our marriage together, trying to make our home peaceful, trying to be there whenever he needed me. But apparently none of that counted. A week after he filed for divorce, I met with my grandfather's attorney, Mr. Harris. He was an older man with silver hair and a habit of choosing his words carefully. He placed a thick folder on the table. "Claire, your grandfather's estate has finally cleared the final legal process." I stared at him. "And the inheritance?" He nodded. 35 million, approximately. My throat tightened. I didn't feel excited. I felt overwhelmed. My grandfather, Edward Morgan, had been a successful businessman, but he was also a private man. When he died, I was told the estate was complicated. There were trusts, properties, investment accounts, business holdings. It took years to resolve everything. I never counted on the money. I had built my life without it. Mr. Harris looked at me. "There's one more thing." "What?" "Your grandfather created the trust specifically to protect your inheritance." I frowned. "Protect it from what?" He looked directly into my eyes. "From marital claims." I stopped breathing for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means the inheritance was structured as separate property under the trust. Your husband doesn't automatically have a claim to the principal simply because you're married." I sat there silently. Suddenly, Daniel's behavior looked different. The timing looked different. Everything looked different. Because Daniel had filed for divorce before the inheritance arrived. Maybe he knew. Maybe someone had told him, or maybe he had simply sensed that my financial situation was about to change. I didn't know, but I decided I wasn't going to accuse him without proof. I wanted facts. So I asked Mr. Harris one question. "Can my husband access any of it?" He shook his head. "Not unless you voluntarily place it into marital assets or otherwise compromise the trust." I nodded. And for the first time since Daniel gave me those divorce papers, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt calm. The divorce process began quietly. Daniel's attorney sent documents. Mine responded. We discussed the house. The cars, the savings, the furniture, the ordinary pieces of an 11-year marriage, but Daniel kept asking about one thing. Claire's future assets. His attorney repeatedly requested information about expected inheritances. My attorney objected. The trust documents clearly protected the inheritance. Still, Daniel wouldn't stop. One evening, he came home unexpectedly. I was sitting in the living room. He stood near the doorway. "Can we talk?" "Sure." He sat down. For a moment, he looked like the Daniel I used to know. Tired, vulnerable, almost sad. "I don't want this divorce to become ugly," he said. "I don't either. We've been together too long to destroy each other." I nodded. Then he said, "Maybe we can settle everything privately." "What do you mean?" He began listing numbers. He wanted the house. He wanted a portion of our investments. He wanted the business account. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. "And considering your inheritance," I looked at him. "My inheritance?" He hesitated. "Your grandfather left you a significant amount, right?" "How do you know?" He looked away. "People talk." "No, Daniel, how do you know?" He didn't answer. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with the husband I had married. I was dealing with someone who had already calculated my value. I quietly asked, "Did you know about the inheritance before filing?" He stood up. "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point." He became defensive. "I have a right to protect myself financially." I stared at him. "You filed for divorce before the inheritance arrived. That has nothing to do with it. Then why did you ask about it?" Silence. He grabbed his jacket. "I think we're done talking." And he walked out. That night I couldn't sleep. I went through old photos, our wedding, our first apartment, our first Christmas together. The day Daniel's company finally became profitable. And then I found a photograph of my grandfather standing beside me when I was 12. He had his hand on my shoulder. I remembered something he once told me. "Claire, never confuse being loved with being needed." At 12 years old, I didn't understand it. At 39, I finally did. The next morning, Mr. Harris called. "Claire, I need you to come to my office." "Why?" "There is something you need to see." When I arrived, he handed me a copy of a document. It wasn't from my grandfather. It was from Daniel. More specifically, it was an email Daniel had sent to someone connected to the estate. The email asked for information about the inheritance. He had been investigating it, before he filed for divorce. My hands started shaking. Then Mr. Harris said, "There's more." He placed another document on the desk. This one showed Daniel had contacted a financial consultant about how an inherited fortune could potentially affect divorce negotiations. I looked at Mr. Harris. So he knew, at least partially. I closed my eyes. 11 years. 11 years of believing I was married to someone who loved me. And apparently, he had been planning his exit based on what he thought he could get. But I still didn't want revenge. I wanted something more important. I wanted the truth. 3 weeks later, we had a preliminary divorce hearing. Daniel arrived wearing an expensive suit. He looked confident, almost victorious. I arrived with my attorney. No expensive clothes, no dramatic entrance, just a simple black dress and a folder. The judge reviewed the basic financial information. Then Daniel's attorney raised the inheritance. We believe the anticipated inheritance should be considered when determining the equitable distribution of marital assets. My attorney immediately responded. The inheritance is held in a separate trust established by the decedent and is not a marital asset. The judge reviewed the documents. Then he looked at Daniel. "Mr. Morgan, what exactly are you asking the court to award?" Daniel's attorney began explaining. I watched Daniel. He wouldn't look at me. Then the judge asked a simple question. "Did you file for divorce before or after learning about the inheritance?" Daniel froze. His attorney looked at him. I felt the entire courtroom become silent. Finally, Daniel said, "Before." The judge looked at the documents. "How did you become aware of the inheritance?" Daniel hesitated. "Through mutual contacts." That wasn't true. My attorney submitted the emails. The room changed immediately. Daniel's face went pale. The judge reviewed them carefully. Then he said something I will never forget. "This court will not treat a potential inheritance as marital property simply because one spouse anticipated receiving it." Daniel's shoulders dropped. But that wasn't the end. Because after the hearing, Daniel approached me in the hallway. "Claire," I kept walking. "Please." I stopped. He looked different now. Not confident, not powerful, scared. "I made mistakes." I turned around. "That's not what you said when you filed." I was confused. "No, you were calculating." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were going to leave me once you got the money." I stared at him. "You filed for divorce because you were afraid I'd leave?" He nodded. I couldn't believe it. "You didn't trust me enough to ask." I was scared. "And your solution was to betray me first?" He said nothing. Then he whispered, "I still love you." I felt something break inside me, not because I wanted him back, because I finally understood that love wasn't enough. Sometimes you can love someone and still realize they are not safe for your heart. I told him, "I loved you too, Daniel." He looked up. "But I don't love the person you became." Then I walked away. The inheritance arrived 2 months later. $35 million. The number looked unreal on paper. But strangely, I didn't feel rich. I felt responsible. Because money doesn't heal betrayal. It doesn't replace lost years. It doesn't make someone trustworthy, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to use the money to punish Daniel. I wasn't going to buy a mansion and drive past his house. I wasn't going to make social media posts about my new life. I wasn't going to prove anything. Instead, I did something my grandfather would have respected. I built something meaningful. I created a foundation in his name. The first project was a medical assistance fund for families who couldn't afford treatment. The second helped women leaving financially abusive relationships. And the third funded scholarships for students who had talent but no money. I bought myself a modest house, not a mansion, a comfortable home with a backyard, exactly what I had once told Daniel I wanted. I kept some money invested. I helped my mother, and I hired an excellent financial team. But the most important thing I bought was something money had never been able to give me before: peace. The divorce became final. Daniel received what the law required from the marital assets. Nothing more. He didn't get my inheritance. He didn't get revenge. And I didn't try to destroy him. Months later, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Daniel. He wrote, Claire, I spent so much time thinking about what I could lose that I forgot what I already had. I read it twice. Then I put it away. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, because sometimes silence is not punishment. Sometimes silence is closure. A year after the divorce, I returned to the little bakery where Daniel and I first met. It looked almost exactly the same. Same tables, same coffee machine, same smell of fresh bread. I sat in the corner where we used to sit. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt grateful. Not grateful for the divorce, not grateful for the betrayal, but grateful that I finally discovered the truth. Daniel had taught me a painful lesson. Never measure someone's love by how they behave when life is easy. Watch them when money enters the room. Watch them when power changes hands. Watch them when they think you no longer have anything to offer. That's when you discover what was real. My grandfather left me $35 million, but his greatest gift wasn't the money. It was the wisdom hidden inside it. He had protected my inheritance. But more importantly, he had taught me to protect myself. I used to think losing my husband was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. Losing the version of myself who kept accepting less than I deserved would have been far worse. Today, I live quietly. I don't need revenge. I don't need Daniel to regret what he did. I don't need him to see my house. I don't need him to know how much money I have. Because the greatest thing I did after he filed for divorce wasn't keeping my inheritance. It wasn't winning a legal battle. It wasn't building a foundation. It was walking away without becoming bitter. And if you're listening to my story because someone has betrayed you, if someone walked away when you needed them, if someone only valued you when you had something to give, please remember this. Their decision does not determine your worth. Sometimes the person who leaves your life is not taking your future with them. Sometimes they're making room for it. Daniel thought he was leaving before my inheritance arrived. He thought he was protecting himself from losing money. He never expected that the money wouldn't change me. It would simply give me the freedom to finally choose myself. And that was something he could never take away.